Welcome, welcome, come on in. The show's about to begin. Grab your seat and feel the nostalgia grow. Sit tight, relax, and enjoy the ride. We're so glad you're here. Let's go. It's time for Let's Play with AppleMatt.
The inside of a trading post was a wondrous place, dark and cool and filled with most anything a person could want. It was here you came to do your fur and hide trading business in the 1860s and 70s, the years when folks like Wyatt Earp and Bat Masterson nearly hunted the buffalo to extinction. After fur trading went the way of the buffalo, the few trading posts that stayed in business geared themselves more to prospectors and pioneers. Guess that's what you call adaptation. Wyatt Earp met Bat Masterson when the two of them were hunting buffalo in Kansas. It was there that they learned how to handle a variety of guns, rifles and shotguns, and to discern between a good gun and a bad gun. You see, back in the Old West, guns weren't always very accurate. A man might go through 10 or more talking irons before he found one to his liking. So, trading posts would always have a ready supply of used, and maybe not so good, weapons to choose from. If you were interested in prospecting, as most folks in western mining towns were, a guidebook suggested the following. Organize into 4-man teams for protection. Next, you'd need 40 pounds of bacon, 25 pounds of gunpowder, 3 yoke of oxen, and a wagon. The prospectors also needed picks, shovels, good rifles, food for 3 weeks, and, a mule with a proper fitting pack saddle to carry everything. If you were interested in prospecting, the trading posts supplied local miners with the tools they needed to work their claims: dynamite, picks, shovels, lamps, boots, and work clothes. A miner's other needs, for companionship, for example, might have been better satisfied down the street at the saloon. Once a miner was working his claim, he would collect samples to bring back to the local assay office for testing. It was important to keep the different samples separate, so they'd know which ore came from which area of which mine. That's what these metal canisters were for. By the 1880s, trading posts weren't doing as much trading as they were selling. Much of what the trading posts sold came packed in barrels like this one, and were loaded heavy with everything from mining supplies to dill pickles. Drinking and smoking were a way of life in the Old West. In towns like Tombstone, prospectors used to give out cigars when a new mine began producing ore, just like a proud daddy would hand out cigars when a baby was born. Gamblers, mulling over a poker hand, preferred long, dark-wrapped Cuban-like cigars, while gunfighters opted for the long, thin, milder ones. Nearly everyone chewed tobacco, because everywhere you looked you'd find a spittoon. They say the Birdcage Theatre got its name because of its balcony boxes with curtains, where a man could close off the view and get himself some privacy. The women who worked at the Birdcage would slip into these boxes to sell drinks and, quite often, sell themselves. The gals performing these services were called soiled doves, making the term birdcage quite appropriate. The West might have been wild, but it was cultured too. As soon as townsfolk had dug up or swindled enough silver, they began yearning for your refined, cityfied activities like theater. So, your typical Western town often had several theaters. The fanciest would feature legitimate plays, opry, and learned debates. In the audience, you might find mining officials, doctors, and lawyers, the town's better people. Of course, crosstown, at places like this, your common miners and smugglers and cowpunchers might be patronized in plays like The Widow's Victim or A Husband's Vengeance, or appreciating the cultivation of barmaids who performed on stage and dancing revues, and sometimes performed off stage too. If you want to see the show, just click and I'll shut up here. Now, many of these same patrons of the arts would also go to see Shakespeare plays when they were in town, and some of the locals knew the lines of those plays better than the traveling actors. Speaking of which, in Tombstone, back in 1881, our pal Wyatt Earp took up with a traveling actress named Josephine Marcus, who would later become his third wife. This presented a couple problems. First, old Johnny Behan was already engaged to this same Josephine, so aside from fighting over who would be sheriff, Wyatt and Johnny were now fighting over a woman too. Second, Wyatt was still married to Mattie Blaylock, or at least as married to her as he ever was. As it turned out, Johnny got the sheriff's star, Wyatt got the girl, and poor Mattie got abandoned. Now how's that for some real-life theater? In 1881, Wyatt Earp posted a sign on the Birdcage saying, "Persons entering this house are required to divest themselves of firearms or other weapons." Of course, not everyone did. One night, a mediocre magician told the audience he would catch bullets in his teeth. He hit a few slugs in his mouth, and then he spit them out as his assistant was firing those blanks. Suddenly, a drunk stood up in the audience, pulled out his gun, and said, "Catch this one, Professor." Luckily, a bystander jiggled the drunk's arm, and he missed. But you should have seen that magician hightail it out of there. The notorious Birdcage Theatre in Wyatt's Tombstone kept trying to become a respectable family entertainment spot. So, they started a ladies' night on which, if and you were a lady, you'd be admitted free. Guess the price wasn't low enough, though, because not one lady showed up. In fact, no proper lady ever set foot in the Birdcage for years to come. Most of the so-called hostesses who worked the Birdcage were really ladies of the evening. These gals usually lived out back, behind this door. A back door was real convenient in a place like the Birdcage because it allowed gentlemen to slip outside unseen. Now, Wyatt Earp knew many ladies of the evening in his day. In fact, several prostitutes using the name of Earp were arrested in Dodge City, though historians think that they may have just been Wyatt's distant relations. Posters like this were put on either side of the stage by the management to advertise upcoming performers at the Birdcage. One featured Mrs. de Granville, billed as the woman with the iron jaw. She packed the Birdcage to the rafters with a strong woman act, where she lifted weights and pulled heavy loads with her teeth. These seats are where the ordinary cowboys and miners sat to watch the evening's entertainment. The more important folk had seats in the Birdcage balcony. Of course, sat may not be entirely accurate, since often as much excitement happened in the seats as on the stage. The patrons of the Birdcage were inclined to do whatever they had a mind to. They were an ornery bunch who cussed and spat and fought with each other in a room that was filled with cigar smoke and sweat. It was on a stage like this that the patrons of the Birdcage watched the evening show. There they saw minstrels and burlesque, but the main entertainment was the women, who sang and danced in costumes designed to tickle a man's imagination, and sometimes leave him with nothing left to imagine at all. Through this here curtain, a man could go up to the private balconies that gave the birdcage its name. Wyatt Earp and his brothers sat up in these balconies. They occupied the ones on the left side of the theater, while Sheriff Behan and his crowd sat on the right. If one side applauded an act, the other side booed it. If one side cheered, the other side made catcalls. And everybody expressed their opinions with gunfire. A western town was a noisy town, and a good theater always had heavy red curtains like this to cover the windows and separate the performance hall from the street. It kept the sound of the horses, wagons, and other street noise from coming inside and disturbing the patrons, as well as blocking the view of people outside who didn't pay for a ticket. These seats are where the ordinary cowboys and miners sat. What was it like to stand here and face a raucous crowd of cowboys and miners who were waiting in these seats to be entertained? Eddie Foy played the Birdcage once. He was one of the more popular comics of his time, and he said the Birdcage should have been named the Coffin because it was built the shape of one. Of course, he might have been soured on dance halls because one night in Dodge City, he was almost lynched for making disparaging remarks from the stage, and the mob had a rope around his neck before he was finally able to talk himself free. The steps behind this here curtain led you back to the seats, and many's the cowboy who used it to get up on the stage. During one performance of Uncle Tom's Cabin, just as an actress was crossing an imaginary frozen river with a trained bloodhound on her heels, some drunken cowboy rose to her rescue, ran up on stage and shot the dog. Poor drunk was beaten up by the crowd for spoiling their entertainment. When he awoke in the jail the next morning, he felt real bad and not only offered to give the actress money, but offered to give his horse as well. Curtains like these were often made of thick velvet, with fancy patterns woven into the material, and came in rich maroons and blues. A theater was fixed up with the most highfalutin decorations the management could afford to bring in from the East. Filigree was carved in the woodwork, and some of the scenes painted on the stage curtains were considered works of art. These seats are where the ordinary cowboys and posters were put on either side of the stage. This picture honors a dancer who died while performing at the Birdcage Theatre. She was one of the Daredevil women. Old Billy Hutchinson, the proprietor, got the idea of fixing the dancers up with special shoes and hanging them upside down above the stage, giving the cowboys and miners a view of the performance that was a huckleberry above anybody's persimmon. This poor old woman fell to her death when the clips on her shoes slipped from the holes that were drilled into the ceiling. This here door led to the box office where you'd pay 50 cents to get in on opening night and 25 cents the rest of the time. That was a lot of money when the average fellow only earned around $3 a day. All the same, people were always lined up outside, waiting to fork over their money for a drink and a dance. Many hotels were conveniently located across from the train or stage depot. After a few days on one of those bone-rattling conveyances, a nice soft chair must have looked like a gift from heaven. Owning a piano was a sign of sophistication in the late 1800s. Those who could afford one made their children take lessons, which the kids enjoyed then about as much as they do nowadays. Singing around the piano was the kind of thing that the wholesome folks did, while the more notorious Westerners were out carousing. Songs like "Oh Susanna," "Buffalo Gals," and "When Johnny Comes Marching Home" were popular tunes. Yep, spittoons are found in classy joints too. But the folks that stay at a place like this probably make an effort to aim a little better. You see, the spittoon was a fairly common sight in Wyatt's day. Gentlemen, and sometimes ladies, who partook in chewing tobacco needed a place to spit. To discourage them from using the floor, spittoons were left lying about as a kind of a trash receptacle. I believe this spittoon's getting a little full. Now, who'd like to empty it out? Roulette was popular back in Wyatt's time, but I don't know why. The odds were worse than they were on most other games. Not only that, but the gambling houses would sometimes fix the wheel and pull a little trick on the gamblers, letting the greenhorns win a few so they get to feeling lucky, and then getting it all back plus some when the poor suckers started betting real big. Now do you understand why you had to check your pistol at the door? If hotel guests were moving out west, not just passing through, this trunk could be stuffed with valuables of all kinds. Sentimental things like a journal or pictures from home would be in there, along with clothing, china, silverware, or maybe even a Bible. Anything and everything they weren't sure that they'd find out here on the frontier. When hotel guests sat to chat for a while, they'd sure have a lot to talk about. Women's suffrage was an interesting news subject, and the Prohibition movement was also a matter of some concern to many people. A lot of folks felt strong about Chinese immigration, too. In 1881, they might have discussed the tunnel that was being built from England clear to France. I wonder if they ever finished it. For your $1.50 or so a day, you get a room with a bed, a washstand with a pitcher and a bowl, a lamp, and a chamber pot. If it was a fancy place like this one, you wouldn't even have to share your bed with a stranger. In a pinch, you might have done some cooking on your potbelly stove, but for the most part, folks used them to keep public buildings like hotels and depots and stores and, even livery stables warm. Now, these little cast-iron beauties also gave people a good excuse to gather around and let some of the latest gossip keep them warm, too. But stoves took a fair bit of work to keep going with wood or mesquite charcoal, which is part of the reason potbellies were pretty much replaced by modern conveniences by the end of the 1800s. When was the last time you saw a group of good people chatting around a gas heater? Wyatt Earp and his friends Doc Holliday and Bat Masterson were known to enjoy a game of cards. And I'm not talking about gin rummy. Doc was so good that he eventually gave up being a dentist and played poker for a living. A pretty lady like this was a welcome sight in a western town, where there might have been 10 men to every woman. Paintings such as this one were called Saturday night art, because they were found in just about every drinking establishment. A cowboy or a miner might not see a real good-looking gal for weeks, but he'd sure see a picture of one at the saloon. Wyatt's resume was a long one. Lawman, gambler, gunfighter, buffalo hunter, shotgun messenger. But the one occupation you might not have heard about was his work as a boxing referee. After his law career was over, Wyatt lived in San Francisco for a time in the 1890s, and one night he was brought in as a sort of a celebrity referee. Wyatt ended up deciding that the man who'd been knocked cold was the winner, because the other fellow had pulled an unfair punch. That went over about as big as the alcohol prohibition movement did in the saloons. Sorry, folks, this here door leads to the dressing rooms. You wouldn't want to disturb the ladies while they're dressing, would you? Partner, if you answer my question true, I have a silver dollar for you. You done wrong, fella. The gunsmith shop was where you could get your artillery fixed up. A repair might cost you 50 cents or so. The gunsmith could also make you a whole new talking iron. He could charge you a few bucks for a plain pistol, a bit more for a rifle, and $25 or more for an automatic revolver. Wyatt Earp is remembered as a gunslinger and was said to carry a fancy custom-built persuader called a buntline special. But today, there's no record of him ever having owned any pistol more elaborate than a mass-produced Colt 45. And Wyatt's good friend in Tombstone, Mayor John Clum, recalled that Wyatt never fired a shot in town before the fateful OK Corral shootout. Wyatt preferred to just pistol whip his adversaries. Now, such slapping around caused a lot less bloodshed than actually firing your weapon. But it still might have sent Wyatt down to the gunsmith shop now and then to get some loose parts tightened up. Back in 1880, you may have paused for a spell to peer through this window and watch the gunsmith at work in his shop, for his was a fascinating business. Although gunsmithing is nearly a lost art now, it helped shape the Old West. People needed protection in those lawless days, and guns were just a part of getting by. But no small part, believe me. In fact, there's an old saying among Westerners, God did not make all men equal, Colonel Colt did. Colt's gun and others, the Remingtons, the Smith & Wessons, and the Winchesters, made hay of any pecking order. Actually, it was these companies with their mass-produced guns which ultimately made the gunsmith obsolete. But whatever the weapons maker, with a good gun in hand, the weak became strong, and the strong just cooked in the same kettle as the rest. They say the Earp brothers were fierce gunmen. Hard to say, because except for the OK Corral gunfight, the Earps reportedly never fired a single shot within Tombstone.